it's very easy to point to Paul because he's the guy who was not part of the 12. Why are you asking this? You're only accusing Paul because the Quran has told you so. That is true. Okay guys, so I wrote an article and I published it. The article is called One Standard, Two Prophets. Essentially, it is about the claim, the Pauline Christianity claim, right? If you've ever met a Muslim, you will see them, say the same thing. Not all Muslims say it, but this has become like a thing within the Muslim circle, within the Muslim debate circle. So we have people like Shabir Ally, we have like a lot of all these guys who run the same arguments. You hear of Bilal Philips, the original author of the thing, which is Ahmed Deedat. They wrote about it, and a lot of people sort of dismiss the argument, right? And I personally, because I'm a Christian and I believe in Paul, also don't believe, that Paul was the author of Christianity. But I think that these arguments are strong. So what I tried to do with the article is to make a steelman of it, to actually strengthen the article. Before I then show you why, a couple of these claims actually makes Paul's argument stronger. That is the point of the entire essay. It is not just one essay, it's going to be a series, but this is part one. And I just want to talk you through why I did that, right? So let's look at the background first of all. This started with some guy called Ahmed Deedat. He's late now, was South African, apologetic. He shared so many booklets. He had so many debates. He was a proper Dawa bro. And with these Dawa bros, they do a lot of research on Christianity and they put things together and they make these arguments, and the arguments go around and a lot of people repeat it. And the argument essentially goes this way. There are four major things, right, that he accused Paul of. And what I'm trying to do here is to show you why those four things are actually strong. That if you talk to a Muslim and you don't know how to defend this, right, like you realize that they're not going to listen to you because they'll feel like you don't understand them or you probably don't listen to them, right? I'm going to show you the four arguments, and I'm not going to argue from books that they don't, consider to be authentic, because Paul was credited with 13 of the 27 books in the New Testament. And the New Testament generally shapes the Christian theology. So if Paul wrote or was credited with 13 books, that means effectively he was the major guy that shaped the theology. But I'm not going to argue from all the 13 books because not all the scholars sort of agree on that. Some people will say, some is forgery, some is majority of Luke's words, some things were imputed, blah, blah, blah. But at least we agree on 7. Even someone like Bart Ehrman, who is an agnostic, agrees that there are 7 books that are the ones that are core, and those 7 are the ones that I'm going to use for the foundation of the entire series. It's going to be Romans, it's going to be 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. Now, before I go on, I'm not a scholar on any of these things. I'm learning, but for me, it is important for me to be able to correct certain misconceptions about the religion that I believe in, and also help Christians to be able to answer some of these questions, and also ultimately help Muslims to understand like some wrong beliefs in the hopes that they see the truth, because everything here that I'm trying to do is just to pass some truth that I think I'm learning, and share it with you guys. So what are these arguments? There are 4. The first one, right, is he came too late. Paul came too late. And this is not like a weak argument, because if you think about it, Paul came way after Christ had died, way after the crucifixion. He had a revelation on the road to Damascus, and all of Jesus' messages had already been taught at the time, right? Even by his own account says, all his teachings are not from men, they are through a revelation. And so it means that he never met the man who has all the messages and all that stuff. That's a strong argument, right? He enters the story way after Jesus had died, and Jesus's story was between 30 and 30 CE, if I'm correct. The books that I'm talking about were written between 50 and 60 CE. So about 30 years after Jesus died, that's when those books were written. So that's the first argument, that he came too late. The second argument is that he never met Jesus. That's also a strong argument. Like, you didn't meet the guy who you claim to be representing. Yes, we know that like revelations happen and stuff, but this is where it becomes really strong. There were people who were alive, who met Jesus, who you knew, who were disciples, the 12, right? Paul didn't just come too late, didn't just not meet Jesus. He didn't even go to any of these guys. He didn't go to Peter or John or Thomas or James. Initially, it was until 3 years later, after he had gone on preaching, he had gone to Arabia, he had gone to Damascus, he had preached this message, before he came back to meet these guys. Please, if you are a Muslim, you will most likely think this guy would have corrupted the message, right? 3 years is a long time. It's a really long time, guys, for somebody to corrupt the message. And when you're speaking to a Muslim who has been taught to believe that Paul corrupted the message, and then you are just dismissing some of these arguments, like, it doesn't make sense. Think about it. 3 years is a long time, let alone books that were now written like 20 years, 30 years after Christ that you actually never met. So, second argument is that he never met Jesus. I mean, if you read Galatians 1 verse 11 to 12, I'm going to put that on the screen. That is where he talked about how his revelation came like through, or his gospel came through a private revelation. So nothing was taught to him directly by Jesus. The rest of the guys that were taught by Jesus even said a lot of things that Paul eventually seemed to contradict, because he didn't contradict it, right? Like, I'm going to show that in the rest of the essays, but he seemed to contradict it. The third is that he changed the message, like he corrupted the message. And this is one of the strongest ones, because Jesus Christ, if you read the story, upheld the law, right? You can read through Matthew 19, 16 to 17, I think, or Matthew 5, 17 to 18. I'm going to try to put all these verses on the screen. It shows that Jesus Christ followed the law. Paul, on the other hand, preaches justification apart from the law, justification by faith. We know that is the core message of Paul. So in Romans 3:28, that is the core message. He preaches Christ as the end of the law, and you find that in, I think, Romans 10 verse 4. I'm also going to put that on the screen. He preached that the law didn't just end with Christ, it was nailed to the cross with Christ. You find that in Colossians 2 verse 14, I think. And he ended his message by saying Jesus, that was according to the Muslims and according to how he preached, if you read the Bible through some certain lenses, was a servant of God, ended up in Paul's preaching as God himself in the flesh. Again, if you're a Muslim and you read this, and your Quran already tells you that the Bible has been corrupted, this is just standard corruption. It just reads like standard corruption, right? So you need to be able to respond to the argument rather than make mockery of it, which is something that a lot of Christians do. I'm going to get there in a minute. The fourth thing is that he had no standing, right? Nothing to stand on. I've already mentioned that he never met Jesus, so he can't stand on that, right? He was not part of the disciples, so he can't stand on that, right? He didn't go to the disciples on time until he started preaching, so he can't say, oh, he got the direct message at least from the disciples. And if you follow Islamic tradition, right, there's something called the Isnad, right? I'm not a scholar of the Isnad, but the way that I understand it is that for you to say something is authentic about a teaching of Prophet Muhammad, whom I don't consider a prophet at all, unfortunately, but for you to say something was authentic about the teaching of Prophet Muhammad, they need to be able to trace, one, you have to be credible, then they need to be able to trace that thing you are saying to someone who actually met Muhammad in his lifetime. And that lineage also has to be credible, which is the reason why you have some hadiths that are rejected and some that are sahihs, like Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, that they believe are quite authentic. And that tradition makes a lot of sense, even though it doesn't quite it's not very complete. And when we get into the series eventually, when I make the next set of episodes and write the next set of essays, you'll be able to see why the Isnad tradition, fails in this instance. But it's a good tradition, it's something they believe in. And Paul kind of sort of fails that tradition. He didn't have any standing. I already mentioned that. And then to make it worse, right, the people who actually had standing, like Peter, Paul directly corrects them to their face. He didn't just correct Peter, he kind of sort of even called him a hypocrite. I think if you read it in Galatians 2 verse 11, if you read the entire thing, right, he he disrespected Paul somewhat. I mean, he didn't disrespect him, because we know that through reading the context, we know that through reading the Bible as a whole and understanding the entire message. But if you read that part, it kind of feels like he disrespected Paul. So if you are correcting someone who actually met Jesus, doesn't that just look like you are creating your own religion and then slapping the logo of Jesus on top of it? That's kind of feels like a slap. So these four arguments are really strong arguments. I wrote a full essay on it. I'm going to link it in the description below so you can read like much more about why this is good. This is the more reason why it lands hard, right? I started this by saying that there are 27 books in the New Testament, and the New Testament is what shapes the Christian faith. Yes, we believe in the entire Bible, the Torah, the Psalms, all of the prophets and what was revealed to them, which is like progressive revelation and all that, everything pointing to Jesus, and everything culminates in the New Testament. But the New Testament is what largely shapes the Christian faith. So if there were 27 books and 13 carries his name, and this guy did not meet Jesus, and this guy seemingly had no standing, he was correcting the guys who met Jesus, he must have somehow corrupted the gospel. So it's a very easy thing to believe, right? I've already run you through the isnad, which it kind of feels like Paul doesn't kind of have, right? Like because he said it himself that his revelation is not through any man, it is through God himself. So, and Paul is not necessarily like a prophet in the sense of the way the lineage of prophets, because that lineage of prophet ended with Jesus. Yes, we still have like people with the gifts of prophecy today, but it's sort of different in a sense from that lineage of prophets. So he feels that it's not, and these things make it very, very difficult to make a case for Paul. But I have to be fair, because while I am saying these things are strong, the Dawa bros also just throw a lot of things around. For instance, they say that Paul didn't care about Jesus' message. He actually never mentioned Jesus' message. That is false. I'll put a couple of passages on the screen, but he talks about Jesus' message on divorce, the Last Supper, supporting ministers. So the idea of Paul ignoring the message of Jesus makes some sense, because he spoke largely on his own authority through the revelation that he got from Christ, but he still referred to the message of Christ. So that is sort of not fully true, right? For Christians, right, we do two things that doesn't help. The first thing is the reflex of mockery. We say Ahmed Deedat is not, somebody who is a scholar, because the book, like the particular book that this argument was really made from is called Crucifixion or Crucifixion. Crucifixion, the original meaning of crucifixion, and crucifixion, fiction meaning, something that you just made up. I'll put all of that on the screen. When you read the book, it's a bit convoluted, but he wrote the book a long time ago, and so sometimes we make a mockery of it, or we do a straw man. We pick like the easiest argument, we break it down, and we claim that we have won. No, if you talk to a Muslim and you do that, and they walk away not necessarily believing in you, it is because they feel like you haven't listened to them, and that is true. We shouldn't be doing that. Instead, we should be making an argument. The second thing I think that we try to do is to psychoanalyze the person who is asking, and we say, why are you asking this? You're only accusing Paul because the Quran has told you so. That is true, that the Quran has said that the book is corrupt. But it is still very easy to point to Paul. That the Quran says that the Bible was corrupted, which has its own case. I don't want to go into the Islamic dilemma today. There's a lot to be said about why, like, even the Quran affirms the Bible, right? But like, that's something separate. But if the Quran already says that the Bible is corrupted in some way, and I know that it's not corrupted in the sense of like textual corruption. That's not what it means. That was sort of formulated later by Ibn Azim when they figured out that they couldn't reconcile all of the contradictions in the Quran with the Bible. But let's just leave all that. Like, if the Quran already says it was corrupted, it's very easy to point to Paul, because he's the guy who was not part of the 12. He's the guy who could not have gotten Jesus' gospel directly, who fails the isnad. So when you say the Quran told you that the Bible was corrupted, and that's the reason why you are pointing to Paul, that is not an argument in defense of Paul. Yes, it could still have been Paul. Make an argument is the point. Now, this is not to make snide remarks about Christians, because a lot of people who are Christians don't care about this stuff, right? They just care about the faith, and I understand it, right? You believe in what you believe in. You believe in the Bible just like I do. But the Bible is true. Christianity is true. All of that stuff. But when you are faced with conversations with Muslims or with atheists, it behooves on you, and the Bible also tells you, right, that you should, defend the faith. And you need to do that with logic. You need to understand the arguments to make. You need to read the Bible. I'm not a scholar on the Bible. I'm trying to read as much as possible. But don't just make a mockery or straw man the argument and all that stuff. So that's for Christians. But this is what I'm proposing, and this was the point of the entire essay, and will be the point of the entire series, because it's a 5-part series. I'm going to be writing in total. The first one has dropped. Like I said, you'll find the link in the description. The entire point of this is that I'm going to make an analogy, because I like to debate and I like making analogies, right? I'm going to make an analogy of a metal detector. So if you've ever been to an airport, right, you would have to walk through a metal detector, because obviously no one wants you carrying a gun into an airport or something, that could be sharp or whatever that stuff is. And so you have to go through a metal detector. Your bags and everything has to go through the metal detector. It's a very stupid metal detector, because it's just there. It doesn't recognize anyone, whether you're a Christian, whether you're Muhammad, whether you're Jesus Christ, whether you're the president of the United States. It doesn't care. If you walk through it and there is metal detected, it beeps. Now imagine a scenario where one person, the first guy who looks like me, maybe me, I walk through that metal detector. I'm carrying some kind of metal, maybe a fidget toy that is quite heavy, and the alarm beeps, and the guard pulls me aside, and he searches me, and he questions me, and he delays me, and maybe he doesn't even allow me get on the flight. But then the next person walks through the same metal detector. It doesn't just beep. It literally almost jumps off the ground. When you think about a fire alarm, there are instances when, if the fire alarm goes off in your building, maybe you are baking something in the oven, you forget to, turn it off on time, and the fire alarm goes off. Sometimes it affects other units within your building. If you're living in a block of flats, it will affect other units such that their own alarms also begin to blare. It is that bad that the metal that is being detected on the next guy causes so much ruckus. But rather than the guard applying the same standard and saying, hey, let's pull you aside, let's search you, let's question you, let's detain you, let's delay you, or make sure you don't get on the flight with whatever it is you are carrying, the guy just pats him on the back, turns off the metal detector, and allows him to walk through. As a matter of fact, maybe even gives him a VIP seat on the plane. What is going to happen is that the rest of the people on the queue would now have realized that the metal detector is just a toy. It is just theater. It is just there for decoration. The guard only wants to search whom the guard wants to search. So if you're part of the people that the guard wants to search, you are in trouble. It doesn't matter whether you hold an AK-47 or whether you just have a wristwatch. It doesn't matter. If the guard wants to search you, they will, because they've proved to you that the criteria, which is the metal detector itself, is just theater. My simple ask is this. And I know before I even go to the ask, right, like there are other debater Muslims out there that I watch who are intelligent, who understand fallacies and stuff like this. They will most likely point to this as a tukokwe, right? They would say, oh, you are just saying you too. You did it. It's like saying I stole from the bank, and then somebody accuses me or points out to the police that I stole, and then I'm saying, oh, well, I stole, but you stole as well. That is true, but that doesn't make me any less guilty. It doesn't put the money that I've stolen back in the bank. It doesn't mean I'm still not going to go to jail. So that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the criteria actually the criteria? That's all I'm saying. Like, or is it mere show? Because if we put both people through the same metal detector and he beeps for one and you pull him aside, you better be ready to pull the second one aside. Now, I already set some constraints for myself that I'm not going to use books that you may say is wrong. The 7 that I quoted is what I'm going to use throughout the series. But what I'm going to show you is that those claims are actually what makes Paul and Pauline Christianity, what you will call Pauline Christianity, actually strong. What makes Paul a true apostle of God. And majority of the things that make up those arguments, even though at the surface of it they look strong, they are actually quite weak when you read and you go deep into it. That is the point of the entire essay. So where I'm going to go next with the second part of this is the first argument, which is that he came too late. I'm going to show you that the numbers, right, actually makes Paul's lateness a strong defense, not a weakness, right? I'm also going to show you that Paul did something, even though he came too late, that someone who is trying to make up a religion or trying to form a cult or trying to, corrupt a message would be very, I dare use the word, stupid to do. He named living witnesses and dared people to go and ask them. Next time, when I write the next episode of the essay, that's what I'm going to be showing. And I'm going to make a follow-up video. If you want to see that, I would ask you to subscribe, like this video so that other people see it. I also invite you to debate me on this if you feel like maybe you have some counter argument. I'm open to it. You can leave that in the comment. I'm also going to put times when I want to debate. I'm going to put it on my channel. This is Femora's house. You can find me on Femora's house on any of the platforms here on YouTube or on Instagram, on TikTok, wherever it is. And you can invite me for a debate. Happy to do that. Thank you for watching. Catch you in the next one. Check out the description for the next essay. I'm going to also be dropping that there. And I'm going to be dropping it everywhere as well. As soon as I drop the video, I'll also let you know. Thank you and see you next time.